famous quote that says, "Belgium, a country invented so that Britain and Germany would have a place to sort out their differences." In August 1914, Germany would invade Belgium as part of the Schieffelin Plan, violating Belgian neutrality. This would lead to immense devastation and atrocity amongst Belgium and its populace by the German army. The occupation led to industrial decline, food shortages, and widespread poverty. Belgian resources and labor were exploited by the Germans. Key battles, such as those in Ypres, devastated the landscape, especially in the region of Flanders. Cities, infrastructure, and farmland would be heavily damaged and destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of Belgians would be forced to become refugees, fleeing to the Netherlands, France, or the UK during the First World War. As the quote suggests, Belgium's strategic location made it a battleground. Over the next few days, I'll be exploring the battlefields and memorials of World War I and II in Poperinge and Ypres, two incredibly beautiful and historic Belgian cities. In what ways are we able to see the effects the war had on Belgium through the lens of these two towns? How were the dead remembered and respected beyond the grave? To help better explain and answer these questions, I'll be guided by two incredibly fantastic experts on this topic: English historian, professor, and author on military justice, Julian Pataski, and Dr. Dominic Denduven, assistant director and curator at the prize-winning In Flanders Field Museum, which we will later see in part 2. So please sit back, relax, and let's make it happen. I arrived in Belgium through Ypres, a city we will later speak about in great detail in part 2. But first, let's talk about Poperinge. Poperinge is a city in Belgium, and it acted as a key British base during World War I. Away from the front lines, it was a place of rest, but also sometimes severe punishment. The first place of significance here is Poperinge Town Hall. Under Poperinge Town Hall was a jail. During the war, that is where British soldiers were imprisoned, and some were executed by firing squad. You can actually feel the weight and grimness in the jail cells. A total of 68 British soldiers were executed by firing squad in Poperinge during World War I, many of them in the courtyard of the town hall, also known as the Shot at Dawn site. Here, I was joined by historian and professor Julian Pataski.
They put a blindfold on the face, and you have a chaplain on one side, you have a doctor on the other. The doctor will open up your shirt, put a stethoscope to establish where your heart is, do the shirt up, and pin on it a little bit of handkerchief, or sometimes there's a little white disc right over your heart. The priest, meanwhile, is usually encouraging you to say prayers. It's often not a complete prayer as such. It's usually something like, "Safe in the arms of Jesus. Safe in the arms of Jesus." And their ankles are tied, and the reason why is because the object of an execution is to kill somebody quickly without any fuss. So you don't want anybody moving. No ducking, no diving, no wriggling, nothing like that. And that's not just in order to achieve the execution quick. It's also because the firing squad are often quite nervous. Nobody wants to shoot at the sitting target, and often they know him. In one case, the guy's brother was ordered to join the firing squad, and only at the last minute the officer said, "Okay, you don't have to." To refuse to join the firing squad meant 2 years in jail, and possibly even worse. You won't get executed yourself, but you will be in real trouble. The guys for the firing squad never volunteer. They're always nominated. You. 10 or 12 of them. They come here. The sergeant, before they've arrived, has taken their rifles and loaded them, and they're lying on the ground. Soldiers walk in, silent. They're told to pick up the rifles. They raise the rifles up. The captain says, "You've been sentenced to death for cowardice." And I came across somebody who was being executed who just shouted out, "Never!" when they said it. And then what happens next is very quickly. The doctor steps away. The priest steps away, the officer raises his hand like that, the soldiers raise their rifles like that, and it goes like that, and it's fired. Totally silent. The idea is that somebody shouts, "Fire!" If you shout, the guy starts wriggling around. That means he gets wounded instead of being killed. If he's not killed outright, then you as the officer have to pull your revolver out, stick it against the side of his head, and blow the top of his head off. No officers like doing that. It's messy. Sometimes you get the brains all over you as well. If they've aimed straight, they hit the heart. There's nothing pumping any blood around, so there's not great splashes of blood everywhere. Firing squad is given the order by the sergeants, "Left turn, quick march out." And usually they have been kept separate from the rest of their buddies the night before, and very often they're given a week's furlough. And the reason why is because the man who's been executed also has buddies, and if he finds out somebody's in the firing squad, they're very likely to go and get their rifle and shoot the guy.
And many of the men executed were likely suffering from shell shock. This is what we now understand as PTSD, and as seen, it was poorly understood then. Today, many of those executed have been posthumously pardoned, as public understanding of psychological trauma in war has evolved.
It took Julian 11 years, took me 8 years. So between us is 19 years, and we forensically got every single name of them in print. And the British government was forced then to disclose the names of all of the soldiers and all of the trial dossiers, and it created a campaign that lasted 16 years, and they were all given posthumous pardon. 2006, I walked on air that day, but it took all that time to do it, and their names have been hidden the whole time. The army said, oh, it would shame the parents. No, it didn't. It made them incandescent with rage. I knew the wife of one of them. I knew several of their kids. They weren't upset, they weren't ashamed, they were furious. I can't tell you how angry. But the significance of this is the use of the death penalty to enforce military discipline.
Professor Ptowski reminded us remembrance means telling the whole truth of war, including the parts we want to forget. These stories are also featured in the nearby Talbot House Museum, or as abbreviated, HOC-H, which offers insight into life beyond the lines of Poperinge. And this is the next location I visited. Talbot House was founded in December 1915 by Chaplain Billy Tubby Clayton and Neville Talbot. Talbot House was a soldiers' club for British troops stationed beyond the front lines of the Ypres salient. It was named in memory of Gilbert Talbot, Neville's brother, who was killed in action. Located in a 3-story townhouse in Poperinge, it offered rest, reflection, and community just miles from the brutal trenches. Talbot House was deliberately created as a non-rank space where soldiers of all backgrounds could rest, write letters, attend concerts or readings, and find spiritual support. It offers a rare sense of normalcy and dignity, contrasting sharply with the dehumanizing conditions of the front lines. In an era of strict military hierarchy, as we earlier saw, Talbot House stood for equality and inclusion. Soldiers could make tea in the garden or attend religious services in the chapel in the attic, known as the upper room. Though it was Christian in foundation, Talbot House was open to all faiths, offering moral support and human connection in a time of immense stress, fear, and grief. After the war, Talbot House inspired the founding of the HOC-H movement, an international Christian service organization promoting fellowship, service, and reconciliation. The phrase HOC-H comes from the military signaler's phonetic alphabet for the letter T for Talbot House. Talbot House remains preserved as a museum and guest house, offering visitors a deeply personal insight into war experience. Unlike battlefield museums that focus on military action, Talbot House highlights the emotional and human dimensions of war. It serves as a reminder of shared humanity. Even in the darkest times, it reminds us that even in war, places of hope, kindness, and community can flourish, and that the smallest acts of care can leave the most enduring legacy. It is now time to transition to some of the most graphic locations of the war, where much devastation occurred and many people and soldiers lost their lives, some as young as 14 years old. Here is the Yorkshire Trench, located on the outskirts of Ypres, one of the few remarkably preserved surviving World War I trenches open to the public. It's cold, narrow, and eerily intact, not to mention surprisingly small vertically. During my visit here, it was very cold even with my coat on, and it was made even colder because of the windy, flat landscape surrounding the area.
In effect, you're in a freezer. The soldiers used to wear what are called puttees. Puttees are the leggings that they wrap around. You might have noticed they all seem to have very skinny legs below their knees. That's to save the trousers. The army doesn't like spending money on new trousers.
So imagine how these soldiers, who were teenagers at the time, dealt with colder temperatures both day and night for months on end. The trench was originally constructed in 1915 by British troops of the 3rd Battalion, Yorkshire Regiment, hence the name Yorkshire Trench. It was later developed into a frontline trench and communication tunnel, playing a crucial role in moving troops and supplies to the front line during some of the fiercest battles in the Ypres salient.
And so this headquarters, which had previously been vital for driving into the enemy, actually was useless. So they moved out of it and move forward. And this filled up with water. Remember, the canal is just the other side here. And everything that was down here stayed exactly as it was for decades. And this area, they discovered a hole in the ground, and then they pumped this out, and then they revealed this time capsule. That's what was behind here.
Unlike many trench sites, Yorkshire Trench remained buried until its rediscovery in the 1990s near the village of Busson. Archaeologists from the Dugout Project unearthed the trench system while conducting a rescue excavation. They uncovered personal items, uniform fragments, and even human remains.
Here were found lots of bodies. They knew that the Germans never captured these trenches. Never did. They were attack trenches. Germans were always over there. So when they came to excavate these, they were amazed. They found a pair of German boots in there with the feet still in them. What had happened was the blast of the shell had vaporized the body. The feet inside weren't German. What had happened was the British soldiers didn't like the boots they got. Their boots are always wet. They were just lace-up boots, whereas the Germans always had boots that came up to here. Their feet stayed dry. So they called pulled out into no man's land, took the boots off the dead Germans, put them on in their own feet in the trenches. That explains why they found it.
Being physically inside the trench allowed me to experience the claustrophobia, vulnerability, and psychological strain endured by the troops.
You need somebody to do the cooking. You need somebody to go and empty the latrine. Once you start to play around with that, the military effectiveness starts to go. And then you start stress. It's like you in a football or a baseball team when you've got somebody who's just not up to it and it has impacts and consequences. It sounds very subtle, but the effects are really, really, really catastrophic when your life is on the line. I get the shakes because I'm really scared and I'm really frightened, but the guy in front of me is firing a machine gun, and if he doesn't have ammunition, you're all going to die. So how am I going to regard him? Is he a coward? Do I feel sorry for him? Or am I going to say, get your act together, or I'm going to shoot you because you're no use to anybody? Because people are very unkind to one another when your life is on the line and it's you, the enemy's coming at you, and the guy next to you is not pulling their weight. You get rid of them, and that's what happens. That's what happens sometimes. They have an officer that they don't trust or an officer that they dislike. It used to be called in the Vietnam War fragging.
And then Professor Towski proceeds to give us a great example of this exact sentiment.
He was eating a sandwich and bits of bread were dropping on the ground. An officer came along to him and said, "You dirty beggar, you're making a mess in the trench. You're going to be court-martialed." You understand he's been reprimanded and he's going to be completely disproportionately punished for dropping crumbs on the ground. Damn it, the trench is all full of poop and stuff, you know? He actually says in his diary, the fellow behind him says, "Excuse me." So, I stepped aside. The guy lifted his rifle and shot the officer in the face, killed him. And he wrote in his diary, he said, "You need to understand that in the trenches, a different set of behaviour obtains. On the parade ground, I didn't mind the officer shouting at me, humiliating me, or anything else, because that's what officers do. They've got power complexes. Not all of them are nice, kindly people like me. But in the trenches, everybody's life depends on their buddies, and there is no room for bullying, no room for it. And the way you settle with bullies down there is permanent. Nobody's going to report him, not the fellow who was eating the sandwich, clearly not the officer, nor is the fellow who shot him. Nobody owns up to murder. How many people died like that? Nobody knows."
Furthermore, troops ate very little during their time in the trenches, and their meals were often destitute.
As many of you may have heard already, a military marches on its stomach, and this is no different than World War I. Food was always evolving. There used to be alcohol in rations as well. There would be salted pork, salted beef, basically non-perishable items. You would also include something called bully
Beef is corned beef.
Yes.
It's that red corned beef, comes from the Argentine. It's like salt beef, except it's in fat. It's not the first thing you reach for, but some people like it.
Some people like it, but many people also grew to hate it. You would also have various types of breads and jam, and of course copious amounts of tea as well. However, something in particular that made a return was something called hardtack. Basically, hardtack is very simple to make. It's made from flour and water, and sometimes a little bit of salt, and it's very, very dense. You can hit it against something, and it's very hard. And you might be wondering, why would anybody eat this, or why would this be in a military ration? It was non-perishable. It's very long-lasting, and it was also inexpensive. Whenever you can cut corners, I suppose you will.
You got it, do one.
When you're in the trench itself, as you can see, there's not a lot of space when it comes to cooking, and you also don't have a lot of time to prepare the food. Typically, a soldier would dig out a little area, and they would put what was called a Tommy cooker. The common name was Tommy that was utilized.
Yeah, Tommy was the general name for soldiers.
Yes, so it's basically that's a pot, or they would put a pot over charcoal or wood, and you would cook the food.
And that is how most soldiers ate. The last location for today is the Tyne Cott Cemetery. I think this is a fitting way to end the day because it helps signify the end to the cycle that is war. Tyne Cott Cemetery, located near the village of Passchendaele, it serves as one of the most powerful and moving memorials to the human cost of World War I, particularly during the Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. It is the largest Commonwealth war cemetery in the world, with over 11,000 graves. Of these, over 8,300 graves are marked as known unto God, for soldiers whose identities could not be confirmed. The Tyne Cott Memorial Wall at the rear of the cemetery bears the name of 34,957 missing soldiers from the UK and New Zealand who died in the Ypres salient after August 16, 1917, and have no known grave. The cemetery is built on the site of a former German strongpoint, part of the defensive line at the Passchendaele Ridge. Many would perish trying to capture the position due to environmental factors such as mud and an uphill offensive, but it was eventually captured by Canadian, Australian, and British forces during the Passchendaele Offensive in October 1917. German pillboxes, which are concrete bunkers, still remain in the cemetery, including one beneath the Cross of Sacrifice, symbolizing the transformation of a battlefield into a place of peace and remembrance. The cemetery was designed by Sir Herbert Baker, with input from Sir Reginald Bloomfield. The cemetery is laid out with rows of white headstones in a tranquil garden-like setting. The carefully maintained gardens feature the iconic poppy flower, which is strongly associated with the concept of remembrance. The memorial wall complements the nearby Menin Gate, which we will later visit in part 2. While the Meningate lists the missing up to mid-August 1917, Tyne Cott continues the list for those lost afterwards. Together, they bear the names of nearly 100,000 soldiers, with no known resting place. This cemetery is a symbol of international remembrance, commemorating soldiers from across the British Empire and Commonwealth. A reminder of the enormous cost of war, particularly in the muddy, bloody fields of Flanders. Tyne Cott Cemetery is a solemn, beautifully maintained, and deeply moving memorial to the fallen of World War I. It tells the story not just of an individual soldiers, but of an entire generation lost to war. The scale of the site is overwhelming, but the message is clear. We must remember. I hope you all enjoyed this video and are able to leave it learning something new. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and be sure to check out part 2 featuring other locations and people such as Ypres in Flanders Field Museum and Dr. Dominic Denduva. Take care.